I just think that you should include it as part of your analysis, right? If you think that neuroscience, right, and taking an approach whereby we elevate neuroscience to a level whereby we increase the positive traits, inborn human connections that exist, if we strengthen those connections and kind of take some of the tribalism and aggressiveness out of people's behavior patterns, right? Like we talked about before in our previous conversations, I have always said from the very beginning when you presented that theory that I think that's a great idea. Okay. But I also said very clearly, and I'm still of the belief that what you're saying there is not a solution to racism. And you shouldn't think of it that way. I think it's problematic to think of it that way. And so
Okay.
the only thing that I think would change it from being problematic as it is now to being something that's a little more, I guess, anti-racism focused is if you actually deal with the legacy of white supremacy and racism in your analysis and your suggestion of empowered humanity theory as a solution, which I've never
Okay.
heard you do. So yes, if you
Okay.
were to do that, it would make a big difference to me.
Okay. When you use the phrase white supremacy, does capitalism and liberalism, like, are both of those things part of white supremacy when you talk about white supremacy? Because what I'm hearing a lot of in society is that when people say white supremacy culture, what they're really referring to is liberalism and capitalism. So I'm trying to see if that is your understanding of white supremacy.
So when I say white supremacy, what I mean is all of the universe of consequences of the implementation of a tyrannical racial hierarchy where white people were placed on the top and black people were placed on the bottom. I'm literally talking about the historical reality of the racial hierarchy as it was created, designed, implemented, and then integrated into all of our systems of power.
I heard you mention that empowered humanity theory is not a solution to racism, but I want to push back on that idea a little bit, because one of the maybe the only thing that makes people not be racist is to recognize the humanity and the individuality, and to see another person as a unique human being. And that whenever we practice that over and over and over, our brains, our psychology is formed in a way that we are not prejudiced. We are not hate. We cannot hate someone that we see as an individual. So what I'm encouraging is to practice that as many times as you can during a day. And whenever you practice seeing someone as a human being and seeing all people as a human being, you can't be racist, because you're strengthening the neural pathways that make you not racist.
Yeah, man. I
So
mean, I mean, I'm
that
right there with you.
it is a solution to not being racist. And what I see in society today is that we are being front loaded to focus on our differences. And when we do focus on our differences, it naturally strengthens the human capacities for prejudice, aggression, and cruelty. So the more we practice seeing each other as an other, we're actually dehumanizing each other and justifying treating each other awful. So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to bring attention to that. Say, hey, we're currently addressing these issues in a way that is making things worse for us. And if humanity is important, then we should focus on our shared humanity, not neglecting our past. But I'm also aware, just the history of our species is barbaric. And if we can break those barbaric tendencies, that's the key to our empowerment. And right now, the majority of society is not intentionally finding connections with others. We're not intentionally disrupting those thoughts of fear and judgment that we have towards each other. We're just not doing that. So I'm trying to encourage us to do those things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, go
Sorry,
ahead. You can finish. Go ahead.
I was done. I was fixing to ask you a different question, but I was like, no, let's just marinate on that and let you respond to that.
So my response is, brother, that as the first time that you ever brought this theory to me, I actually I appreciate what you're trying to do. Okay? Like I'm on board with what you're trying to do. I also believe that what you described is for the most part correct, except for your conclusion that it's a solution to racism. It may be a solution to an individual person taking on racist thoughts, but that is not what makes racism. It
Well,
never
that's why I'm
was.
also trying to get that idea into our workplaces, in our schools, and in our universities so that that idea becomes the standard norm.
Okay, but what about what I just said?
You have to change the individual before you change systems because it's
Yeah.
those individuals
This is
individuals
so
that
this
change the
that
system.
right. So that statement right there, that is where we have a problem. Okay?
You
That
don't
is
think it's individuals that change systems?
I don't think that. I mean, obviously, you need individual actors in order to create systemic change, but like it's not like there's some kind of process whereby you have to start with changing individual people's minds, and then that's the only way to change a system. I think that that's made up. So like, like it's just not there's no nothing supporting that idea except for that's what you believe. So like, like I just that's what makes it hard for me to go along with that. All right, so hang on, but pause. Matt, I want to give you a chance to talk, brother, because you've been waiting patiently. So go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I was actually wanting to ask Jason about this idea of his. So, Jason, in your opinion, why were in the United States, why were Northern whites less white supremacists than the Southern whites who were directly interacting with blacks all day? If your theory that the more direct interaction necessarily neurologically humanizes people. Why in the Balkans are all these people who have lived right next to each other for millennia? Why the more they see each other, it seems like familiarity breeds contempt. And
Well, I didn't say familiarity and proximity. I said whenever they are able to see someone as an individual. And I believe that most slave owners probably viewed their slaves as property rather than viewing them as individuals. And because they viewed them as property rather than an individual, it justified them mistreating them.
are you familiar with a lot of antebellum literature and the kind of pro-slavery arguments? That I'm not defending slavery here. I'm just saying that the slave owners insisted that they had very close, intimate, living in the same home, living their lives together, relationships um, with the enslaved black people that entire time.
Right.
And
And I would say that they probably still viewed them as property. And it was the abolitionists that saw the slave as a human being worthy of dignity and worthy of these Enlightenment ideas that led the abolitionist movement.
so, do you think in the Balkans they don't understand that the other parties involved are human beings? Do you?
I'm I'm not too familiar with the historical strife there, but yeah, I believe so. Just like the Israelis and the Palestinians view each other as animals and less than human.
Well, I would say that's way more one way, but like, okay.
Well,
Yeah.
it's both ways. There are Palestinians that view Israelis as animals, and there are Israelis that view Palestinians as animals. There are Russians that view Ukrainians as animals. There are Ukrainians that view Russians as animals. That's
I don't.
all groups of people.
Yeah. Listen, but Jason,
It's a
again,
thing.
you're kind of highlighting my point from earlier right now, which is that like you're saying, oh no, there are people who do this, there are people who do that. By creating this, what I would call a false equivalency, just because you're saying that there are people who do this, which I'm not going to disagree with, because people do everything that we can imagine.
What's a false equivalent? Well, tell me what the false equivalency
The
is.
false equivalency is that because there are people who view others in these conflicts as not individuals and as animals, as you were saying, that because there are people from both groups who have that perspective, that there's some kind of equivalency there. And there isn't. And that's what
The
I'm trying to get
equivalency is that human beings hate each other.
Okay, but
Like,
see, yeah, like
there are
that,
there
that is
that's
what
a
I
that's
don't.
a true that's a true thing.
I mean, that's not a true thing, right? Like, I don't hate you, brother.
It's
I don't hate
not
anybody.
true.
Like, I'm a human being. I'm a counterexample sitting right in front of you. So, like, no, it's not. It's not like a quality of humans that
I
we
didn't
hate each
say
other.
all human beings. I
Okay,
said
so what are
human
you? So what are you
beings
trying to say?
hate groups of other human beings, and you don't see that?
Wait, well, tell me what you're trying to say exactly. You said groups of
That
human
that
beings.
there's a lot of human beings that hate a group of people.
Okay, sure.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, but like, there is all kinds of nuance from there, right? That's like a generalized statement, but from there, the amount of nuance is extensive. So you can't really start from there and only go from there to figure out a solution to something like white supremacy, which has a more specific history and context that would radically change your thinking. If you,
Okay.
so like that's my point. It's like, I'm fine with that starting point, okay? But like, if we're going to go from there, we can't stop there and then like start thinking about a solution directly from that point. I feel like we have to kind of bring the dialogue closer to people's actual reality, like in the
Okay.
Israeli-Palestinian crisis, for example, right? um, you know there's the Zionist state of Israel, right, which has been for decades oppressing Palestinians have had no power to reinforce, even if there are Palestinians, which they definitely are, who think of Israelis as animals. But like, my point is, like, they have no power with which to propagate that idea except for within their own localized communities. They have very little power to act on those thoughts or ideas or feelings in a way that like influences Israeli lives on a large scale, even though they do that, right? Like, but it's extremely limited capacity compared to what the state of Israel can do to reinforce their animalistic
Well,
viewpoint of Palestinians.
Jason's suggestion, excuse me, Jason's suggestion is what's paradoxical about it is he claims to be like promoting common humanity when he's actually dehumanizing and belittling absolutely everybody but himself. Like the Palestinians have every right to be angry, they have every right to feel hate, and that's hatred, tribalism, conflict. Love for your own ethnic group, love for your own people or race, those are all natural human things. And to say that we should dissolve all that away and come together and realize that we have no differences. I mean, that's how an alien would come. He'd be like, "Oh, well, they have these different religions. I don't care about them. They have different color. They're all humans. I don't see why they're fighting." And that's fundamentally a dehumanizing perspective on humanity.
Well,
My religious
I think you're putting a
differences matter to
perspective.
me?
I think you're putting a perspective on him that he's not really saying, though, right?
That's
Like,
Yeah,
exactly.
no, Matt. I'm sorry, but that's not what I'm saying, and that's not what I'm thinking. You've misinterpreted.
Then how does this neurological theory have anything to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict improving?
can I help with that actually? Because it may, and you can tell me if I'm off base, but I'd like to try using your own theory, Jason, to talk about that. And I also could use the work that I've done with the Contraband Wagon as well. Matt, one thing that I do is every month I have round robin discussion on the subject of race. People from all around the world come. We do it virtually on Zoom. You're more than welcome to join. We're going to have one in another week and a half or so. And a woman came who lived for just under a decade in Israel, and she was talking about an experience she had. And that experience was the following: that she was forced to shelter a young Palestinian teenager whose car had broken down in the wrong neighborhood, if you will, when there was a curfew. And if he was caught outside a curfew, you know, he could literally be unalive quite easily. So in that area. So he was sheltered by some people who took pity on him and kind of hidden with this woman who reported during our conversation that she was scared to death being there with him. And her literal story was, after kind of a couple of hours of walking on eggshells and whatnot, she was hungry. And so she asked, they had trouble communicating, but she did try to offer him some food. And then they sat down, she made some food, they started eating. They kind of, you know, stumbled their way through some communication. And the crux of her story, as she's telling it to us and recounting it to us, was that, and then I realized that he was a human. And that was literally the point of her story, is for her to talk about her realization that the person she just spent these hours with was a human being. So I say that just to say that, like, this is a thing that exists. People do look at other humans as not being human, and that is still very much a thing that exists. And I think that for her, it also shows the power of the propaganda that she was under while she was living there. And she also mentioned that as well. But like, his theory and how it relates to that story, in my personal belief, and Jason, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that some of the practices, right, they involve kind of unraveling some of these stereotypes, right, and some of the programming that some of the propaganda that she was under cements into one's consciousness and thought patterns. And having that proximity to him, sharing a meal with him, serving a meal to him, trying to communicate with him, it's what broke her out. It's what made the programming kind of fall away. So it is a thing that happens. A lot of people who come to my conversations report that when they're in closer relationship with Black people in America, same thing. They start to be able to more easily see the experience of these people that they're never going to be privy to otherwise, unless they consciously attempt to learn about it, because they're in closer proximity to these people's life's experiences. So just by being in closer proximity, like you said, right, like it doesn't automatically change anything, right? Because obviously slaves were in close proximity, they were in relationships, they deluded themselves into thinking, that somehow these close relationships with people they didn't even see as people were somehow, I don't know, had some kind of meaning.
To take a small step back, how do we define who's oppressing who, right? And if we absolutely must, which I think we must at this point, because you've insisted that there's the white supremacist system is still oppressing you, I would agree. Okay, cut me off if I'm jumping to conclusions.
No problem. I agree with that.
Okay. So how would we objectively, in a language we could both kind of step outside of our bubbles? So what would oppression look like objectively? And my opinion is, since the 1960s, and it's not been a light switch thing, it's been a process, right? Neocolonialism, neoliberal neocolonialism has reversed the polarity of the system of racial exploitation and abuse. And it's taken on a very different color, a very different context, and I am in no way trying to compare what I'm going through with like chattel slavery or the trip over here or all the horrors involved in that, which I validate, including a lot of the Jim Crow stuff was also deeply unfair to your people. I'm not invalidating that at all. However, for your entire, I'm assuming, unless you're dyeing your hair, I'm assuming your entire adult life, you've lived under a system where you've been legally discriminated in favor of, academically discriminated in favor of throughout the academic system, economically, in terms of tax investment into different neighborhoods and stuff like that, discriminated in favor of. The government, whenever it's writing up a contract to build a bridge, it asks, can we find a guy who looks like you first? And only if they can't will they allow me to build the bridge. That is systemic, black and white, no pun intended, or let's intend the pun, discrimination. Cultural, if you see on Netflix and the cultural milieu we live in, every show is promoting a mixed race couple, is promoting integration, is denigrating white people in general and the white male father in particular. That's a common sitcom trope. That's and it's reached the point to where ordinary white people are pushing back and calling it woke. The extent to which these anti-white memes and themes have permeated our culture. So looking at all that, and then you have the criminal dimension of it, where Black Americans are committing crimes, including crimes against white Americans, at several times the white rate, and then not only are we physically victimized by that violence, but we're also driven out of those neighborhoods, driven out of those schools, subjected to conditions in our communities that are deeply unfair to us due to the forced integration policies, which have been the official federal policy for your entire adult life. Or your entire life since you're born. I don't know how old you are. I'm not going to ask. I'm bad at telling how old Black people are.
I'll be 40 next month.
Okay, we're about the same age. Okay, Black don't crack, right? You look like you could be in your 20s to me. I have no way of telling.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So okay. So based on what you just said there, I guess my response in general would be that I don't think that what you just described is a realistic view of reality. So
was there not an affirmative action up until a couple weeks ago?
Yeah, which group of people were the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action?
That's sidestepping the question. Were you explicitly discriminated?
I answered your question. I said yes, affirmative action was until a little while ago. Yeah, but like, what about my question? My question's relevant.
No, that's not how quotas work. I know what you're saying, that it also ended up favoring women, including Black women,
and also it did help white men as well. White men were not locked out of these programs. That is a myth that a lot of people who don't really know how affirmative action works in practice believe. I have been a part of these programs, as you mentioned, so I've actually been in them with white men. So I know for sure that these people, white men, qualify for these programs because it was not exclusively a racial quota whatsoever, never was. And so like ultimately it's just not accurate, right? And so it's hard for me to then.
Well, we could do the same tap dancing with Jim Crow, how there were Black successful Black business owners who thrived under Jim. In fact, Jim Crow ending it hurt those business owners because it destroyed, segregated Black business.
I don't know what that has to do with.
Just because there are people who thrive under a system of oppression does not mean there's no system of oppression.
I agree with that. That's not the argument I'm trying to make.
So saying that there are some white people who got into college does not negate the
Well, that's
fact
not
that
what I
white
said,
people were
right?
actively
First, you got to deal
discriminated
with
against.
Matt. You got to deal with what people actually say. All right, first. All right, I never said because white people got into college it means X, Y, and Z. That was never an argument I made. Like what I said was that white people benefited from affirmative action, the very thing that you're saying discriminated against white people. So therefore, you
That's nonsensical.
cannot. So you don't agree that white people benefit from affirmative action?
No, the Supreme Court. I mean, objectively, the whole point of affirmative action was to supposedly correct these historical injustices
Then
against
why
your
were
people.
white females the biggest beneficiaries?
No. Per capita, black females were even more discriminated in favor of than white females. In total, white
Excuse me?
females did, but that's per capita, black people benefited more from affirmative action than even white women. And
Okay, but wouldn't
I
that
think you do
wouldn't
agree
that
that white men were discriminated against.
but wouldn't that make sense under an affirmative action framework? Like why is that so no, you're agreeing now that nobody was locked out. But like now why would it not make sense that per capita people who are from more marginalized groups would get more benefit from this limited program? And why would that be some kind of a sign of discrimination against white people specifically?
Affirmative action was just declared unconstitutional because it discriminates against racial groups. I mean, I would implore you to check the Supreme Court rulings and findings
Well,
where
brother, I'm a
they
lawyer who
explored this
actually
question.
worked underneath the judge who who worked for the Supreme Court justice who wrote the opinion for one of the biggest Supreme Court cases on this subject. So like I don't need to go look it up. Okay? I'm pretty sure I've looked it up.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about.
I mean, I know what I'm talking about, but like I'm trying to figure out what you're talking about, brother. So like, yeah, I mean, what I'm telling you is that people from all racial groups benefited from affirmative action. That's just a fact. It's literally a fact.
That's
And
totally
so
pernicious. That's totally that's like saying that people from all racial groups benefited from slavery because there were in
I don't.
fact
Yeah, you're
black
saying.
and Native
Yeah, you
American
said that
slave
before,
owners.
but I don't agree that that is a 1-to-1 right there at all, remotely. So, and the reason
It's the
why
same
is
error.
well, the reason why. Let me explain. I mean, I'll tell you why I don't agree with that comparison. Is because slavery, right? The intention of slavery was to turn humans into property, specifically based on their skin color. And to label these people with their skin color and to put the mark of inferiority as a human being on them. The point of affirmative action was to try to undermine the legacy of that dehumanization. So they have completely different intentions, and it has nothing to do with dehumanizing white people at all. And so, like, I just
It absolutely does.
why do you think affirmative action is related to dehumanizing white people?
If you say that a white kid with an SAT score of 1200 is less deserving of going to college than a black kid with an SAT score of 1200, independently of their socioeconomic background and everything else, because of the color of their skin, then you're doing everything that Jason's asking us not to do here.
I would agree with that, except for that's not how affirmative action works, sir.
That is how affirmative action works.
No, brother. I've worked at higher ed for
No,
a long time. I've
this
gotten
is
a lot of
spin.
people into college. I've seen many different systems of admissions in college. I'm telling you, I mean, if you want to believe, listen, if you want to believe something else, that's fine, okay? But you can't deny that I have this experience, okay? At the very least, I was literally there when decisions are being made. So like, I can't really say, I can't pretend that that didn't happen and I wasn't there and I didn't see what I see and I don't know what I know, okay? So like, I will acknowledge that you don't believe in that. But like, I don't know where to go from there, right? I think we're at an impasse if like me actually being there where people get chosen to be in college doesn't matter to you and how that happens, like then you're going to believe whatever you want regardless of what anyone says or whatever the facts are. So
Well, here's the problem, though. I respect. I mean, this is a problem you get into with tribes: is they have different moral universes and ideas about what's correct and incorrect on things that matter a great deal to them. the vast majority of white Americans agree with me that affirmative action discriminates against white people, and you've seen that. You've seen that in the ballot boxes. You've seen that everywhere. You can take a poll of it. Your opinion is, no pun intended, the minority opinion. And I'm not saying it's incorrect. Obviously, like there might be some meta objective level in which you're. I think you're referring to a vast blob of plausible deniability that affirmative action moved towards when they realized they were in trouble, and that you were facilitating. But that's, I guess my point there is if we can't even agree on that, the vast majority of white people can't even agree on that simple thing with you, then wouldn't further forced integration actually create more conflict, create more resentment, and create more racial strife and move us further from any kind of like racial harmony?
Well, I'm not sure how not doing it would lead to racial harmony. I think that, yes, moving toward a unification of these two disparate ideas, right? Because if I am right, then basically what I'm being criticized for is not believing in a fantasy. So like, like, I mean, ultimately,
Well, that goes both ways. You think I'm delusional. I think you're delusional.
okay, but like one of
I
us
understand.
worked for a Supreme Court justice who, like, I'm just saying, like, one of us has a little more standing probably to be right as a 20-year educator, as somebody who's been involved in education, worked in higher ed, talked to a billion people who have actually gotten people in, helped people get into college all the time, like,
Well, I wasn't able to go to
been in the
college because you wouldn't
room.
let me in. But what I can say is that the Supreme Court is supreme in these things, and it ruled in my favor, in my uneducated, not elite, not networked with the Supreme Court clerk's opinion. The Supreme Court just agreed with me, and I'm not saying that to say that you're not valid. I'm just saying that, like, my opinion, you're coming at me telling me I'm delusional when the majority of people, including the Supreme Court, agree with me on this matter.
Well,
So
the Supreme Court does not believe that affirmative action locked white people out. That is not what the Supreme Court
that's
held. And
that's a straw man.
no, no,
It
no,
does
because
believe it
you
actually
did.
discriminated on race.
Well, it was actually about Asian discrimination, right? Right. So it wasn't about
Well,
racialized
see,
white
that's what's
people.
funny though, is white people aren't allowed to even complain about being discriminated against. So the entire case had to be constructed around a different racial group because you cannot be pro-white in this system. And that's exactly my point. Is I'm actually the victim of systematic and cultural discrimination in today's society.
Well, why do you think that you couldn't fight against that if that's your reality? I don't understand why you would imagine yourself being powerless in this situation. The facts don't belie that, as there have been multiple racialized white people in recent times who have sued for racial discrimination and won. In fact, the largest award for that is to a racialized white man.
At what point do you have ownership of laying on the floor when the person knocked you down a week ago?
Listen, brother, nobody wants anybody's, like, at least in the black community. I feel like there's this like myth from a lot of white communities that black people are sitting around talking about the white man, how they're keeping us down and this and that and blah blah blah. But really, when we talk about it, we're just like, we want to be left alone. We wish you would leave us. Like, maybe there's this fantasy that racialized white people are just leaving black people alone, and then black people are failing, and that is just not how reality is operating or has ever
Well,
operated.
we
So
are
like,
both entirely in agreement then, because like my whole thing is let's allow the two ethnic groups where they do want to get away from this conflict to step away from the conflict, and that's kind of the enclavism
so this is the other
approach I'm
thing that I wanted to
suggesting.
talk about is, like, you referred to white people as an ethnic group, which they're not. So like, um,
That's racist.
you think it's racist to say that white people
Uh,
are not an ethnic group?
White Americans are clearly an ethnic group. Now, race,
No.
there is a larger racial biological category that's, more of an anthropology thing. I mean, your skull structure. If we both died and anthropologists dug us up and measured our skulls, they'd be like, this was a black gentleman. I'm a white gentleman. They I don't know what they do with Jason's skull, but they'd probably keep it as an ornament on their desk or something. But
Yeah, what you just described is like biological race realism. It's actually a characteristic of and a historical legacy of white supremacy that you just
no,
parodied.
we have different skull shapes. That's not to say you're inferior or
The
superior.
skull
I'm
measuring
saying
thing, the skull measuring
no,
thing, it was all invented, created in order to justify racism. That's literally
no.
the only reason. There literally doesn't exist for any other reason except for that.
No, you're talking about two different things here. We got to understand
really.
there's a difference between science and politics. Okay.
No. Not in the
It's
context.
science.
Not in the
It's science
context
to
of.
say I have a more dolichocephalic skull. It's politics to say I have a more dolichocephalic skull, therefore I should rule over you, or I have these rights that you shouldn't have, having a more mesocephalic skull. You have a
That's
great
the
skull. I'm
only
not insulting your skull.
reason the identification of the skull was ever done is to make that statement. That's my point. It was literally there was literally no other reason for making that statement except to say that one person is less human than the other. So therefore, it is meaningful. Like that.
No,
that's
you can't
all
just
it
say
ever has meant.
You can't say that a fact is a hate fact or a love fact. A fact is a fact. And you
Brother,
can hate
did
that
you hear
fact.
what I actually said though? Like you have to hear what I'm actually. Okay,
no,
so what I'm
I heard
actually
what you
saying.
said, but
So
you're
did I
saying
actually
nonsense.
say? Did I actually say that different size skulls is not a fact? Did I say that? No, I did not say that. What I said
Right, you're
is that
saying,
that fact was only exclusively used to dehumanize people and create a human hierarchy and for no other reason. That is what I said. And so like that is material, brother. You can't ignore that because that's the only reason you know that fact.
Well, you're the one. Okay, you're
So
ideologues
weaponized facts, right?
Correct.
These ideologues weaponized a fact. Is that what happened?
Correct.
And by ideologues,
The same way. The
racist white people.
I mean, the same way that, like, you know, slave masters used to teach slaves that white men were God, literally God, and that the God they were reading about in the Bible was white men. And so, and that they should worship them. And they used all kinds of different ways of convincing people of that. So, yeah, there's a long legacy and history of using a manipulation of facts or a manipulation of beliefs.
Even today that happens, yeah.
Of course, absolutely.
Okay, well, would you trust me in this conversation to not be suggesting you're inferior because of your skull shape? Do you trust me with that?
Of course, that's not the issue, though, brother. The issue is not that you're doing it.
Then we can put that in a silo and set it aside. Because what I'm saying is, when I say I'm white in America, I'm not saying I'm racially I'm lactose tolerant. Or that I'm more likely to have blonde hair or whatever. I'm saying that in America, white American is the ethnicity, is an ethnicity that's distinct from the Black American ethnicity. Now, you can be racially Black and be Nigerian or from Chicago, but those are two different ethnic groups. The Black American, the heritage Black, are their own ethnic group, right?
I don't agree. Right. I'm saying no. And so, like, right, Nigerian ethnicity, right? Like,
they're Igbo and all the different
European from whatever country, X, Y, and Z. White is a racial category. Racial categories are distinct from ethnic categories. Now, they have been blended over time, and that's why this is happening right now. But, like, it's not the case that white means anything related to your ethnicity. It just doesn't.
Well, that's why I called myself white American very early on in this show, because I know that this is a common misunderstanding. I don't come to you as like...
What am I misunderstanding? Tell me.
White American is a legitimate ethnic group in the United States with legitimate cultural and political interests, and a right to the same dignity and future as any other ethnic group in any other country. Whenever you say whiteness is a system of oppression,
so wait, how do you justify that though? How do you justify that statement you just made about what whiteness as an ethnic group? Like, What is your justification for that? Just because people have shared interests? Because those shared interests were literally created based on the system of racial oppression.
No. Our identity isn't about you. Okay, our identity.
It literally is. Whiteness was literally created
No.
specifically and for the exclusive reason to lord themselves at the top of a human hierarchy. There's no other reason
No.
whiteness was created.
No, actually, if you read Nancy Eisenberg's White Trash, the intro to the book, and she's an academic, I think you would find her tolerable. I got to be careful citing sources that you'll dismiss out of hand, but Eisenberg is solid. And she's a good scholar. But whiteness in America actually originated in the Jamestown colony and in the Prince Philip's War with the Native American raids on the settlement. You had these different groups of Europeans, and they didn't understand they were really the white man until the Native Americans define them as white, impose that kind of on them as invaders. Okay, I'm not saying they were victimized by that. I'm just saying that like your historiography on the origin of whiteness is mistaken. There was with the Spanish Empire, they always brought the conquistadors. They militarily protected their settlements. With the British Empire, they didn't. They just they just dropped them off on the shore and let them sink or swim. Okay. And that had a profound cultural impact. It's why you still have the Second Amendment and why gun rights resonate so deeply in the white American mind, because the Indian raids are still kind of back there bouncing around in our head, just like your own historical traumas are bouncing around in your head. It originated with that siege mentality of these scary people from the forest trying to kill you. And what you have in common at that point is indeed your skin color. And what the other people have in common is we didn't know what tribes they were or what the different chieftains' name. We just knew there were these red people in the woods trying to get us white people in our little fortification. And it emerged from that, and is a settler colonial construct that emerged reactively and defensively from that, and where it definitely was weaponized in the way you're speaking of. You're not incorrect that this racial definition of identity was indeed weaponized against your people, tragically so. And I'm not belittling that. I'm not trying to push that, say that didn't happen. That's a very big part of the story. But at the end of the day, those European people of European descent who all ended up speaking English, were pretty much Christian, had strong, some would say psychotic levels of like individualism, all these qualities that make us white Americans, amounts to an ethnic group. Just as real as the French or the Belgian or Yoruba or Igbo. And just like with Black Americans, they had a very distinct experience, unlike our own experience, that still shapes how they see the world, how you see the world today.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, there's not much I can say. Like, I heard everything that you said. I understand it. It doesn't really explain your conclusion to me. It's just you making statements. But like, yeah, like, I mean, I heard all of them. Matt, in terms of your perspective, I do find it sad that racialized white people feel like they have to defend a white identity, because I don't feel like there's anything to defend. Like, what are you so concerned about that's going to be lost? What are you so fearful of that needs protection?
Have you seen what's happened to our schools and communities
Just answer,
since
brother. Just
forced
tell
integration?
me. Tell me. I want to hear from you directly. What is it that you are fearful of?
Our white neighborhoods, communities, and way of life being ethnically cleansed by multiculturalism, forced integration, and reparations that actively, by government policy, including cultural and social factors, actively destroying traditionally white communities, neighborhoods, school systems.
So you think that just by being in proximity with each other, we will destroy racialized white culture just by existing near white people?
That's how anthropology works. If a Chinese neighborhood was filled with white people, the Chinese neighborhood would lose its cultural color and context, and start seeing spikes in violent crime because whites commit more violent crime than Asians. They would see, the changes in the school system. There would be less focus on studying and other traditionally Asian cultural values and things, because the white people would be less. They'd bring a different culture to that environment. Uh, that's I. It seems what I'm explaining is very obvious to me, and I respect that it might not be obvious to you. But I believe ethnic groups should be allowed to exist and to have their own communities and spaces independently of other ethnic groups, where they can be themselves without social engineering or racial justice initiatives deconstructing those communities in the name of some utopian theory of a world where whiteness is deconstructed. The damage that's causing all across America, all across the West, frankly, is huge for us. Maybe you don't see it with your eyes, but I do see it with mine.
Matt, I have a question or a comment. So it sounds like you interpret or see white people as this monolith, and black people and black culture as this other monolith. And it sounds like the black culture and black people are inherently bad from what you're describing.
Not at all.
Because
No, no, no. I'm very
because if
clearly not
someone,
saying that.
well, that's why I asked, because I go back to my home in the suburbs, and both of my neighbors were black, and I never, their skin color, it was never an issue. And one of my neighbors was way more preppier than I am, and another one was way more blue collar than I am. And my ex brother-in-law is way more redneck than I am. So when you say black culture and you describe it as a negative, I know so many examples
Well,
of
I do not intend. I've tried repeatedly throughout this to make clear that I don't look down on or believe black people are inferior, and I've even explained this: the white elites, the white saviorist elites, who are actually pushing that thing. I am a nationalist. I am an ethnic nationalist in that I think that different ethnic groups have distinct qualities that are precious and distinct, and they pose threats to each other if they're forced together in an unnatural, systematic process of dissolving the ethnic groups. I think that's ethnic cleansing. I think that's immoral. I mean, you can flip it around every which way. When the white people were colonizing Africa, you had these unique, authentic African communities that were destroyed in that process, and that we can never get back. And you see the scar tissue all over Africa from that one group imposing itself on another ethnic, these ethnic groups, that ethnic group is the same, And what I'm saying is, with neocolonialism, you have an inversion that's the same process, but now it's targeting the white working class in America and the rest of the West, where they are importing, just like with colonialism, importing these people for economic reasons that are destroying the ethnic and cultural fabric of communities all across America. Just like what happened in Africa, Southeast Asia, or wherever you want to throw the dart on the map.
Yeah,
So
I
would
don't
you
think that
say that it's
sorry.
American culture that's more at risk than white culture at
I
this
don't think
point?
there I don't think there is an ethnically American culture. I think Black American, white Americans have such fundamentally different experiences that
Right, but would you say that there is an American culture?
only as a thin super straight. I mean, there are things that Will and I have in common, but as one thing we can all agree on from this show is that we have wildly different perspectives on the world while sharing the same language and eating McDonald's and having other commonalities as American citizens. I don't know if you eat McDonald's. I do.
Oh yeah.
I try not.
I mean, I do, yeah, at this age, but like whatever. But yeah, okay. Yeah, it to me, your vision for the future, Matt, it seems very dystopian. You know, I don't, I don't. You mentioned that I think in one of your tweets that like there's tons of examples of people siloing in their different groups and living peacefully. I don't know where does that happen.
Where doesn't it happen? I mean, it's that was the world we lived in before the modern world. Is you had these like ethnic groups living in different. I mean, they would fight between each other, but that was an
Right,
exceptional
right, right, right.
thing.
So I'm
But
glad you brought
they,
that up because that's kind of the next point I was going to make, which is that like you tried to make a comparison between colonialism and neo liberalism or neoliberal colonialism or something. But like, you know, the thing that's different is the violence, right? Like, no one is using violence to try to force people to, no one's forcing you with a gun to try to become friends with black people or live next to black people or anything like that.
yes, they
Um,
are. You had literally. I mean, if you look at the Alabama National Guard forcibly integrating the school. You had the National Guard chasing schoolgirls, and you know the photos I'm talking about with bayonets, uh, um, menacing the schoolgirls to forcibly integrate their schools and destroy their way of life for the social engineering experiment. There absolutely is violence behind this system, and yeah, the world has changed, and you have layers of plausible deniability, and the world is just becoming a less violent place, generally speaking. But that does not in any way make the process okay, just because it's not done um, as brutally as it might have been done in the 18th or 19th centuries.
I disagree. I do think that it's extremely relevant that violence is not being used. I don't think what you just
Violence
described.
is. I just gave you a
I don't think
perfect
what you just
example. I mean,
described.
what more do you want than like
Nobody was
the
shot.
federal,
Nobody
the
was.
National Guard, the federal government charging at white kids, forcing them to integrate?
They didn't charge at white kids. They were protecting the black students who were coming to go to school. I mean, that's just the reality.
That's
Because
your perspective.
it's not my perspective in those photos
Those
that you're talking about in the documented evidence from those times. It was the black people who needed protection, and no white people were. Violence was not used against them, even though they were using violence against the black children who were trying to integrate into the schools. That is the historical record. So, like, you
No,
can.
that's your narrative. There's been orders of magnitude more black violence against white people in the 21st century,
That is a
in the
totally
late 20th
separate
century.
point from what I was saying.
I'm
Uh,
saying that forced integration is extremely violent on a day. I mean, you could just look earlier this week with that white girl whose head was bashed into the concrete until she was basically brain dead, just a few days ago. The you see stories like that all the time. These schools are not safe, and these neighborhoods are not as safe as they used to be. The cultural norms, expectations, values. Um, forcing ethnic groups that don't want to integrate is violence, and there is violence behind that too from the federal government.
well, not everyone believes as you, brother. Not everyone doesn't want to integrate. Like it's not some kind of.
Well, I'm not trying to stop anybody from integrating who wants to integrate.
I mean, it kind of sounds like you are. That's what you would prefer. is that like people stick to their own groups. Like that's kind of your ideal of the future. So
Well, I think in America you have a lot of black people who, just like you were saying earlier, just want to get away from white people because of the issues that they
I didn't
bring to
say
the
we want to
table.
get away from white people. What I said is that we don't want white people to interfere. Like what like you were trying to say that black people, like if black people are laying on the ground, like how long should we wait until, like, you know, if they don't get up on their own, like how long should we continue to pretend that someone's keeping them down? And what I'm trying to get you to say is that that whole narrative is not a realistic narrative for black people's perception of ourselves. So like that's a white person's narrative that you put forth about black people. It's not how
No,
black
I agree.
people. Okay, so then it's neither here nor there, right? Like in terms of what we believe. So like you would have to actually like find out, you know, like which I don't think that you've really done. And so like I just want to encourage you to try that like as like a technique, you know, because you're never gonna guess your way to understanding black people and understanding like what our experience is.
Okay, well, I've been listening and learning throughout this.
Yeah, that's why I
I'm not.
appreciate you coming here, bro. I appreciate you like coming on and just being willing to speak. I think that we're just a really far way apart in terms of like the way that we understand history, American history, the history of race and racism, the racial categories and the hierarchy, the purpose of it, you know, how that purpose has like gone into the present and will continue through the future. Like I think that all of that is stuff that we don't really agree on and that we have different perspectives on and different levels of understanding about. And so
Well,
like
let me ask you this: if there's a small subset of white people, we'll call ourselves as a small minority, who are stubborn and refuse to adapt our way of thinking to see the other perspective. We're just not going to change. Do you think it would be okay if they would be allowed to create their own neighborhoods and spaces independently of black people, where they just you wouldn't have to deal with them as much because they're in their own neighborhoods, and we wouldn't the conflict wouldn't be forced upon them? Would you be comfortable with that?
okay, I will answer, all right? But I do want to say, preface my answer by saying, I don't think that what you just described is reality. It's like a thing that could be reality. So I just want to put that out there because I don't think that that's a reality that could ever come into existence. So
The idea of white people existing in the future as autonomous communities that can perpetuate their own culture is beyond your imagination.
I it's not it's not just beyond my imagination. I don't believe it's real. A real outcome that could come into existence. So
Okay. Okay, because I can imagine a future with like charming black communities that are doing great and have great culture, art, museums, you name it. Great, HBCUs. I mean, there's a lot to be proud of in the Black American community. I'm the first to affirm that. Well, second after you. But uh,
Should
I,
those communities, if they were to exist, should those communities have rules not allowing other ethnic groups?
it would just be a covenant community. Say it would only be allowed for new subdivisions, so that nobody
Like
would have to move
if
away.
I wanted to go visit one of the black museums or hang out and maybe even move into a neighborhood or a town that's predominantly black, would I be forbidden from doing that?
Well, it wouldn't be for any public or government utilities or whatever. It would strictly be ownership of homes in neighborhoods, subdivisions. So potentially there could be a black neighborhood where they, as a sort of a homeowners association, were like, we're only selling homes to black families, and those families can only sell the homes to black families in this neighborhood. And it would basically just be allowing the freedom of association in its full extent. Anytime you're talking about government services or public utilities or anything, you started getting into real structural unfairness. It's not. It's that ship has sailed. I'm not talking about like segregation, any kind of like public utility sense. I'm speaking strictly in terms of allowing freedom of association at the residential neighborhood level on a strictly voluntary model, and it would be something you would have to opt into. So it's not like, some white family find out they have to move because they're in a black neighborhood that's been defined as black or anything goofy like that. I'm saying should we be allowed freedom of association to preserve and celebrate our ethnic group if we were to choose to do so?
Yeah,
Universally speaking.
I think that question is radically different from the first question. But like, yeah, I think that that's perfectly fine. But again, I don't think that that's what we were talking about, and I don't think it relates to whiteness. You do. So like, that is where we disagree. But
Okay, well, if you agree with that, then we're in agreement on everything else. Because if you respect me enough to allow my culture and identity in a non-violent, non-threatening way to continue to exist, then we have no structural opposition.
yeah,
I know
I
we have a
mean,
lot to disagree on.
I don't even believe that that your culture is under attack at all. So
Okay, well,
that's my personal belief.
right.
I think that basically what you described is what we already have. Like anyone's free to, to go where they want, and there are still plenty of communities that are almost exclusively white. And
We're entering an economic apartheid system where it's becoming harder and harder to find a white neighborhood, especially the only place you can find an all white neighborhood are in economically depressed regions where there are no jobs. If you want to live an urban lifestyle, that's not a possibility. And if you want to live near economic prosperity, you can look at the demographics. That's no longer a possibility. And with current demographics, the way they're going, within 20, 30 years, you're looking at white neighborhoods being pretty much extinct in America if the current civil rights tyranny continues.
Civil rights tyranny, huh? Okay. Civil rights tyranny. What does that mean? Civil rights tyranny.
The civil rights movement, which started out with the promise of equality, has metastasized into a full-on assault on our freedom of association and has become explicitly, overtly anti-white and targets white individuals, communities, and culture.
Okay.
I mean, you can think I'm just goofy, but I mean that's what this anti-woke backlash you're experiencing is. There's a lot of me.
I don't think that's what it is. I think that there's tons of evidence to show otherwise, and so like I can't go again. I just can't go along with it because I'm aware of it. So I can't just go along with what you're saying there. I'm sure there are tons of you, but like that's not evidence of anything. So. Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your perspective. If you want to learn more about, there's definitely tons of experiences that I've had as a black man that you wouldn't be privy to or understand without hearing about them that are on my YouTube channel. I encourage you to check them out and, see if it changes your perspective at all. There's definitely things that have happened to me that are in direct conflict with things that you're saying. Like, for instance, I was told that I was an affirmative action admission to Duke from a kid who had a lower SAT score than me. Right? Because like in his mind, I couldn't have possibly earned my way into Duke. And that's that's automatic for a lot of racialized white people. They don't even consider the possibility that we could earn our own way on our own merits. So like, if anything, the paternalism that I faced was like that kind of paternalism. Like, oh, like if you got somewhere, it's only because someone let you. And it's just like, oh, okay, that's weird because I was taking all AP classes and like got like basically my first semester of college like done in high school and got a really good score on the SAT and like have been working my ass off, have all these extracurriculars, do all this stuff. But all that doesn't matter to you. I must have just, and it didn't matter to the school either. They just saw that I was black and then they got me in because of that. It makes no sense. It's just completely made up. And so like it's and to me, that's a reflection of the consequences is that kind of thinking, that kind of automatic thinking of the stereotype must be the reality. And because racialized white people have never been forced to go outside of that whatsoever, until really now is like the most forced anyone has ever used to try to get racialized white people to think outside of their own perspective on these subject matters. And yeah, of course, that's why people are feeling more uncomfortable these days, because there is a power that can fight to force people to actually think about this stuff more critically, which never existed before. So yeah, like, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think that people should embrace being uncomfortable. No one's trying to kill you. No one's trying to hurt you. I think that people are trying to communicate.
Well, can I say that about you? That no one's oppressing you?
Brother, listen, we both live in the same oppressive society based on race. I'm not distinguishing us based on that. You're stuck on that, but I'm not distinguishing us based on us somehow living in a different type of society. What I'm saying is that the nature of the oppression in our society historically has been one way. I am not going to sit here and pretend that everything has transformed from that one way, because I don't believe that to be reality. I get that you do. And I heard that perspective, and I accept that you have it. I still don't believe it's reality.
Thank you for allowing me to share that perspective. I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate you're having me on here. I did not expect that.
Yeah, no problem. And I appreciate you sharing it, okay? And like, if you end up learning more and you decide that you want to make some adjustments to your perspective, let me know. And if I do, I'll do the same. The one thing that I do want to request from you is the information for some of the points that you made today. You know, like, I would love to find out more about what you rely on your facts about affirmative action and your conclusions about it. I would like to see that information. I'd like to understand more about the government contracts that you were talking about and what allows you to think about that. And there was also the male father, the white male father denigration that you mentioned. I'd like to see the articles and the support for that. If you would send that stuff to me, I would love to have you back on for a second conversation after I've kind of read that stuff and give you my thoughts on it and just hear your reflections on my thoughts.
Okay, I appreciate that. I do want to say it was a pleasure with Jason. I had pegged him as a mere libertarian radical at first, and he's a lot more well-spoken, thoughtful on a range of issues than I had expected. So I owe him an apology for how sharp I was at the beginning of this show, and I really appreciated his input in the conversation.
Appreciate that.
Cheers. I appreciate both of you guys. Thank you. All right.